sunflower seeds and talking against the government. And that helped us, exercise, maybe in a way, ourselves and survive communism and even laugh about it.
Ăsta pot fi fondul. Feul de cristal, Hârlău, 1984.
The dreadfulness of everyday life provided rich material for one student comedy group. They filmed this spoof New Year's broadcast by Romanian TV for their private amusement. But before any public performances, all their sketches had to be approved by the censors.
It reached the height of stupidity when the Ministry of Culture and Communist Education, I hope my memory's not betraying me and this was the actual name, had issued a list of forbidden words. These words weren't allowed on stage, in shows, on TV, in newspapers, anywhere else.
Yes, newspapers too.
So these words were forbidden.
One forbidden word was dollar. The censors assumed that anyone who used the word must be an enemy of the working class.
One of the jokes was that as we couldn't say the word dollar, we claimed we had bought a piece of machinery with rubles. The censors were outraged by this as well and wrote on our script, any other currency. And we said exactly that. We bought this piece of machinery for 300, any other currency. The audience burst into hysterical laughter. It was funnier than any other word we could have used.
Because the student audience cottoned onto the fact that we'd been censored. The censor, a really nice guy, didn't want to impose on us the alternative to the word dollar. So he allowed us to choose any other currency, as long as it wasn't the dollar. But we took it literally and said it cost 300 any other currency. People roared with laughter.
After 20 years in power, Ceausescu started planning his legacy. So in 1985, he and Elena signed a document proclaiming their decision to adorn Bucharest with a new government centre. The document was buried in the foundations. The project meant knocking down a quarter of the old city. "40,000 homes were demolished. There was no consultation and no appeal. These pictures were secretly taken by someone living on the edge of the destruction zone. Centerpiece of Ceausescu's new Bucharest was to be a palace of the people, second only in size to the Pentagon.
Ceausescu inspected his building sites every Saturday morning. Preparing for these visits was quite exhausting. He had enormous vitality. No detail was too insignificant. He required a precise explanation about everything we did. He was very abrupt.
For the construction workers, this was exhausting and dangerous. One worker had to disguise his identity when he spoke to an undercover Western reporter while Ceausescu was still in power.
Reggel 7-től este 7-ig kellett dolgozni. Őrülten nagy munkanormát adtak. Amikor a napi munkadagot nem dolgoztuk le, ott tartottak minket, és tovább kellett dolgozni, addig, amíg be nem fejeztük. Az én századomból 6 hónap alatt 13 ember halt meg. 2 felakasztotta magát, a többi üzemi baleset következtében halt meg.
Ceausescu also started to knock down Romanian villages and move the inhabitants to new towns. This would both clear more land for agriculture and tighten his stranglehold on the peasants. The story of how Lenuta and Marin Sărescu's house was demolished is depressingly typical. The method used was to dig a large hole and to bulldoze the house with all its belongings into it.
We took anything we could grab quickly.
Did you resist?
If we had, they'd have taken us to the militia station and beaten us. Some resisted, and they got beaten up, so people just shut up.
They were allocated a flat in a new block. It had no doors, windows, running water, or heating.
When I reached the stairs, my knees were shaking, coming from a beautiful house to these ruins. No door, no window, nothing. Debris everywhere, everything a disaster.
So in desperation, Lenuta and Marine bribed an official to let them move into a nearby flat. This too had no running water or heating, but it did have a small garden.
For us peasants, it was a catastrophe. They took away my house and land and gave me a flat for which I have to pay rent. I've got no money to pay the rent, no way to make a living.
Many people who lost their homes were traumatized. At the same time as thousands were losing their homes, the regime of shortages that Ceausescu was inflicting on his subjects was making him more and more unpopular. Food became very scarce. Ceausescu was exporting Romanian food to pay off the country's huge foreign debts. Pig's trotters were known as patriots, as they were the only parts of the pig which didn't leave the country. For Nicolae Melinescu, with a working wife and a newborn child, finding the time to shop was very difficult.
So there was a saying that if you don't have a grandfather or grandmother, you should buy one, because they came in very handy. They would do all the queuing for you. And my father would volunteer. He loved my son very much, so no sacrifice was too much for him. And he would queue 14 hours to get half a packet of butter for my son.
Paraskiva and Marian Niagu were typical of the thousands of peasants who moved to towns to get work. For them, the shortages were an even bigger problem because they didn't have a residence permit. This meant they weren't eligible for food coupons.
If somebody offered me meat, some lard or chicken's legs and throats, I never refused. Even colleagues at work gave me food because they knew I had 3 children and I had nothing to feed them.
Because they had no residence permit, they weren't eligible for a government flat either. They had to rent privately this leaking shack which had no bathroom or lavatory. For heating and cooking, they used an improvised electric stove. But during the 1980s, there were more and more power cuts.
We had electricity in the daytime, but at night they cut it off, which meant we couldn't cook. If we had wood for the fire, we could at least stay warm, but if not, we froze.
The increasing number of daytime cuts made the house even colder. Those with central heating did not fare much better, as the periods when it was on grew ever shorter, and even then the temperature was never above 12 Celsius. All this was a major source of dissatisfaction. Our student comedy group did a sketch on how the average Romanian started his day. But as so many of the words they wanted to use, like for instance, food, were banned by the censors, the sketch was silent.
A man wakes up in the morning, goes to have a shower, and tries to turn on